At times, railway modelling can be an uphill struggle, but we're certainly not struggling today. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. Now, in the last video I mentioned that this one would be about landscaping. Well, sadly that's not the case, because if I had done the landscape in this one, it would have meant that in subsequent videos when I do the area of the incline that goes to the Freightliner depot, it would have meant I would have crushed the landscape. I have to do the back first. But in this video we've got a little bit of everything. We've got some redesign work going on at the back of the station. We've also got some track laying, wiring. There's all sorts in this one, so I hope you enjoy it. Now, before I do any work this side of the tracks on the construction of the station platform, well, platform 1 and the station here, I thought I'd best take a look at what's going on the back rather than overreaching and breaking everything. And this incline that goes up towards the Freightliner depot that will be on top of the second helix requires a little bit of thought. There's a gap behind it, so I've got to take that into consideration when building the scenery. And obviously I've got to lay track up here. What I thought I would do is I'm not going to use the foam track bed from Woodland Scenics. Because it's a 5mm thick piece of foam, it would give a pronounced shoulder, and I don't think a relatively slow running, infrequently used track would be that well maintained. So what I thought I would do is use 3mm cork, and to that end, because of the gap that's behind it, I need to somehow fill in that gap. So what I thought I would do is use trimmed sheets of plastic card to give me the right edge, and that would obviously go against the wall and give me a little bit of an area for some scenery to go into this gap, you know, sort of hedging, and allow the track to flow uphill. Anyway, I could of course use card, but I think the problem with using card is once I've laid the cork and then start to ballast on top of that, the water from the ballast from the PVA mix may well go through into the card and sort of to distort it, disintegrate it or whatever. So that's why I've thought of using this is 1.5mm plastic card. I've also got some 1mm sheets. So I shall trim these and then glue these to the Woodland Scenics incline, and I'll use something like Gorilla Glue and see how that holds. And then once that's in place, I can start thinking about trimming up some 3mm cork and then gluing that down and then running the track and see how it runs. Obviously the last thing I'm going to do is ballast it, because we want to prove that it runs without any snags prior to ballasting. Now we do need to get rid of this foam track bed, which should peel off reasonably easily. I think I've glued this down with good old Copydex, so it's never that difficult to get it up without destroying the Woodland Scenics incline. Well, I've put a few scraps of polystyrene on the back just to give the plastic card something to cling on to, and this is the first piece will go in here, but of course it's a little awkward to scribe the arc. So if I mark on here the start and the finish roughly of where it's going to be, but I do wish to leave a small gap at the back so I can put a piece of sort of cling film down and protect this back seam when it comes to doing any ballasting. So there's the two marks on the plastic card. So I thought the next best thing to do would be to put a piece of tracing paper in situ and then just scribe on the tracing paper roughly where the cut needs to be, and then I need to transcribe that somehow onto the plastic card. Well, this can't be that difficult, can it? So just a case of popping the tracing paper in place and then plotting out where the line's going to be. Join the dots. And then take a scalpel to it. In fact, I won't use a scalpel, I'll take a Stanley knife. Always keep your hands upwind of the blade, if that makes any sense. It hasn't got to be exactly on the line, obviously, as long as we're in the general area. Can we snap it straight away? Yes. Because the worst thing in the world is to kind of keep scribing it, trying to get the scribe line in the same place. Right, does this fit? Well, not quite, we've just got a little nibble to take off here. And having made the cut, yeah, that fits nicely. Nothing too accurate, and as you can see there's a little bit of a gap here for me to drop down some protection for when we ballast. So now we're in a position where we can get a pencil underneath and mark it, but as you can see I've trimmed the pencil right down, and then underneath here, and hopefully, yep, as you can see we've managed to get our line. And switching to a scalpel this time, and just leaving a little bit of slack on the line for our gap against the wall. And I find with a scalpel blade it's sort of two nice clean strokes. And then it should just snap. There we go. Easy. Well, that's the first 5 pieces of plastic card cut, trimmed and laid in place. So now all we need to do is to start gluing them in. But what glue should we use? Well, if you're a regular to the channel, you know I do tend to lean towards Copydex, because Copydex is a non-toxic, kind of non-carcinogenic and all the rest of these things glue. It's just an ordinary kids glue really, and if you had it at school you'll know that it smells of fish, and quite strongly as well. And if you're using it as I am on non-porous surfaces, then what you need to do is use it sparingly and put some Copydex on one surface and on the other, leave it for 15 to 20 minutes until it goes tacky, and then push it into place. And the reason I do like Copydex, because if I need to change my mind, which I do quite often, and I need to take this stuff off without destroying the Woodland Scenics incline, I can, because it will kind of peel away. It doesn't do that much damage, as you can see when I used Copydex on that foam track bed earlier. So I just need to coat these 5 pieces with Copydex, leave that for 15 minutes, and then push them into place. It comes with a handy brush, and it's just a case really of dabbing it on, giving a wipe, and then moving on. It's quite a simple glue to use really. If you do choose to use something else, such as what we say sealant, you know, for kitchen sinks and that kind of stuff, it will be a more permanent fixture and it won't want to come off that easy. That's why I like Copydex, because it's for people like me who keep changing their minds, it has its advantages. And talking of changing their minds, in about 5 or 10 minutes you'll get my next revelation. And there's the last little piece done. So now it's just waiting for it to go tacky. So those 5 pieces of plastic card are in there and drying nicely. And obviously I just need to progress my way up the incline and around the bend. Now the way I've designed this, I ripped these tracks out once before because they were just straight and boring and I wanted a nice curve. But what that's done is it's created this piece of land here, which is a sort of isolated piece of infrastructure. You can't put a road in there, I can't put buildings in there because you can't drive to it. So it's obviously going to be platform 2 for this stopping line here. But what else can we do? Now, in conversation with a couple of people, one being Lee Stoddart, and I call my track planning guru, and another chap by the name of Ed, we were talking about this yesterday, and between the three of us we've come up with this idea to install in this area here a electrofrog right hand. So the idea is to install in this area here a left hand electrofrog medium radius point, because that will allow us to build a bay platform. But what will that do for the area? Well, as you can see, it's a reasonably long platform, and it is, in old money, it's 30 inches long, which is about 76 centimetres, which is long enough for a 3-car DMU. So that will allow a DMU to either come up from the helix and cross the double slip at the other top end through into here, into the platform. It can loiter there, and then as a shuttle it could go off to the Barnstable type branch line station. Also, we can use it as a parcels line. So it brings a great deal of, what would you say, interest into this area. Talking about the landform whilst we're here, is with this incline going up, you're not going to have a retaining wall in this area. Instead, when British Railways or whoever dug out this area, they would have had a small embankment coming along here, and that will obviously fill in this gash piece of land here and allow the natural landform to shape up. Looking at the other end of these 4 tracks and the incline, you might think to yourself, well, to that end, why don't you put in a right hand point here and then bring a line right along the back adjacent to the incline to make a passing loop? But in all truth, I don't really want that extra line in there. I want something a little bit individual, like a bay platform. But one mistake I really have made is this gap here, because when you consider the amount of soil that would have to be dug out of this area to make it that wide, it just wouldn't have happened. When this cutting was made through this hillside, they would never have taken out too much soil. I mean, this is tens of thousands of tons of soil just in, a few feet all the way around. So to that end, what can I do? Well, I think I will leave all this in here and the line on top of it. That's exactly where the Freightliner will run to, but I'm going to bring the line of the retaining wall out so that it's much closer to these lines, and therefore on a sort of prototypical basis, when the hill came up, they didn't excavate so much soil, and it will close this gap up before eventually it opens up for where platform 2 will start. Now I've made up a little jig, as it were, out of plastic card, and this measurement here is 4 centimetres, which is about 1 5/8 inches. And what I thought of doing was running this along the outside rail, popping a Sharpie along it and inscribing a line then along on this baseboard to give you an indication of where to bring the retaining wall out. I'm sorry if this kind of gets in the way of the camera, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing. And then if I bring this along, hopefully I'll get a line that runs roughly parallel to the tracks. and that gives me a reasonable arc. And if I go the other way, hopefully I should join up with the current polystyrene from the incline. A little bit awkward now, but you can see where it will join. Okay, we have a plan, and now using a flexible curve, I think they were called French curves whilst I was at school. We just need to bring that curve out to allow the station platform to shape up, and hopefully that'll give a reasonable shape to the wall. These platforms that you've seen me use, they are just old platforms. These aren't actually the ones that will be installed. So now I've got this line and I can start to build the wall out. I can then adjust now the depth of the pieces of plasticard that will go across the top to give me the top of the landform. Now, using ordinary polystyrene blocks and an electric foam cutting pen, I've made up these little piers to go on the outside of the incline to support both the retaining wall, which will actually mount onto mounting card and glue to the front of these piers. Now, I've actually spaced the piers at sort of an A4 card apart, so that when I use plasticard sheets, the overlap will take place on the card, so therefore it gives it more support. Now I just need to remove this rear diorama panel for a moment. Which will enable me to glue these little blocks in properly. And I'm using an acrylic grab adhesive on this, and all I'm going to do is put some on each block. Then give it a run over with a trowel. Push it into place, and then hopefully with a little clamp, which is why I removed that vaccine board to let the clamps go over the back, hopefully these will keep it in place while that acrylic grab dries off. Well, that's the clamps in place, and they should hold those blocks quite adequately while they dry. So now let's switch our focus once more down to the other end. So we now need to cut some cork as a track bed to go onto our incline. And when I use cork for track bed, I find that the best width really with a small shoulder is 1.5 inches wide, which is about 37 millimeters. So all I do is hold it steady, and then with a keen, let's say, Stanley knife blade, is cut it into strips. However, this strip here has a turn in it, so what I'm going to do just for this strip is halfway along I'm going to cut it in half, as it were, which then will allow it to curve easier, and then you can see that one end becomes longer than the other. Just sheer science, isn't it? Staggering what you learn on this channel. So what should we glue it down with? Well, why don't we use our old friend copy decks as per usual. And before we had to wait, what was it, 15 to 20 minutes because it was non-porous surfaces, where this time it's a bit different because one surface is porous and the other one isn't. It's just so exciting, isn't it, really? The dilemmas that we are faced with as railway modelers. So what I shall do is simply whap in the copy decks on it, stick it in place and add a few weights. And when it comes to laying the cork, because obviously what you can't do now is see the width of the riser, and the riser 2.5 inches wide, so what I do is I mark out the centre at 1.25, and therefore when I put my cork track bed on, it's easier to judge where the centre of it goes. And then it's a case of sticking it in place. Seem to have a lump there, bit of cork. Sticking it in place and then working our way up the incline. So I'll just pop a couple of weights on there and then we'll work our way up. This is almost turning into a glue advertisement, isn't it? Nice and straightforward, this, isn't it? There you are, one of my prized possessions. Reduced to a paperweight. When I cut those pieces of cork and I trimmed them to the right width, I must admit I made a mistake. I should have cut them at an angle because therefore the ballasting shoulder would have been much more gentle, and as it is, the first two pieces are at right angles, whereas the next piece I did chamfer at 45 degrees. So try that if you're going to cut your own cork to the correct width. One other thing worth mentioning is now, because I need to put this track in up the incline and try and get it straight, is to use a mirror, because if you pop a mirror at one end, then you can see if you're laying it straight. The last thing I need to do is to run a train up and down this line with a camera on the front especially, and you'll be able to see the sort of dog legs or whatever in the kinks that I've missed out, because it's hard to see up and down that line. So using a mirror is ideal. I want to talk also a little bit about block detection before I put these three pieces of track in. Now, as a train would come from the Freightliner depot onto this track, it would be running at its normal sort of speed, around about 40 miles an hour, given the terrain and the slope of the hill. As it enters the next block, however, it will receive from train controller a command to go from 40 miles an hour down to what will eventually be a crawl speed at the other end here. So its speed will taper off as it makes progress down that piece of track. And then finally, when it hits this last piece of track here before the catch point, when it first draws current from this block, it will then receive a stop command. So the front of the train will stop exactly here. And then accordingly, we need to build some infrastructure to go with that. So naturally, we will put in a signal here to control the train, and the signal would only go from red to either yellow or green, depending on the points and the routes that are being set. And obviously we'll need a little bit of infrastructure around here, such as relay boxes and AWS type infrastructure further back up the line. So it's just planning everything before we sort of kick off. So now what do I need to do? I need to wire up these three pieces of track and drop the cables down and onto the bus. I'll quickly explain how I solder my track. It's all straightforward really. I'm using red and black 1602 cable. That's 16 strands of 0.02 millimeter cable, and if you're into American wire gauge, that's AWG, I'm sure you can convert that over. And this set of tracks that go up towards the Freightliner depot will be on a different power district. So on this piece of track here, I will need 2 insulated rail joiners at this end to isolate it from the rest of the layout, whereas on the other end, it's just the red will have an insulated fish plate as we go from block to block. I do label up all my droppers, and I use this Brother labelling machine, and it makes these pretty nifty labels. So this is the amber track, I'm going to call it, and it's going to be amber 1, amber 2, amber 3, and so on. It's just easier for me to call my track by colours because I've got in such a pickle of calling them fast inner, outer 3, stroke 4, and all the rest, such other utter rubbish I came out with in the past. So let's solder these cables onto here and then pop them into position. And just for the record, I use this sort of cheap and cheerful solder station, and I set it to 400 degrees, and the solder I use is multi-core solder 64 tin to lead, and it is resin cored. So the first thing we need to do is pop a bit of solder on the track. And I'm sure this is all easy stuff. Because we just need to tin the parts that we're going to solder. Now I put my droppers on the underside of the rails because that way you'll never see the cables. If it's obviously in a fiddle yard area, that's not quite so important. These wire strippers are absolutely brilliant, and if you want to set, then you have to look up the number on the side, because I can't give you a link to these, but they are RS 382-2847. If you Google that, you'll end up at the manufacturer. They are brilliant. So I now need to stick on my my labels so I don't get confused, because I'm easily confused. So I just need to tin these cables. And you can see the fumes that's coming off the flux, and there's my label for amber 1. So as I said before, it's black to the back, and that's obviously the black line there. So in we go with the black. It really can't be much easier, can it really? I think that will go without any more. Solder him on, have a quick tug, lovely. And the same with the red, if I can turn it around, might make it easier for you to see. Again, a little bit more solder. Nice sharp tug, and make sure they're on. Then all I need to do is slide up the label, and we're ready to go. You can see the sleeper spacing's been pulled apart, so I can just push those back together, and then obviously it's very difficult to see these cables once they're in and ballasted, so it keeps them hidden. So I need to pop this in place and then do the other two. So the track is roughly laid in place now, and as you can see, there's the 2 insulated rail joiners which separate the 2 power districts, and this track is obviously the one I've called amber 1, and if we move up the track a bit to the join with amber 2, then we have the 2 lots of droppers, So there's amber 2's droppers, amber 1, and another one more insulated fish plate on the inside. However, amber 3 is a little bit of difference there with the rigging of the cable, because there's obviously an issue of trying to drill right through. So I've drilled through the plasticard track bed and then dropped the cables through the baseboard within the area of the polystyrene incline. So all we need to do now is to glue down the track onto the cork. And how we do that? Well, using our old friend Copydex for a change. So I shall just lift the track slightly, lay down the Copydex, put down the track, make sure the track is straight using a track setter template, and of course the mirror at the other end to make sure that it's going down as straight as a die, as it were, and then add a load of weights while that goes off. Whilst that's drying, I'll then connect up the cables and hopefully see if it works. Now all I've done is just use the slack in the cables to allow me to push the track out of the way whilst we put down a coating of this, and all should be well. Well, if you're going to test it, you might as well test it in anger. So we've got this lovely class 47 with 5 Freightliner trucks. And we have to stop it there, otherwise we end up in real trouble. Well, I do hope you found it interesting. Clearly I've got a lot more to do in that corner, and hopefully you'll be around next time and join me. In the meantime, I'd like to thank, of course, the sponsors, which are the guys who contribute both on PayPal and on Patreon, and of course the people who subscribe. And if you haven't subscribed, then please do. It's free after all. And for you, there should be a video here and here, and in 2 weeks' time we'll do it all again. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.